Welcome to this video lecture on the subject of surveys. The most important thing to do at the beginning of a research activity is to identify your research objective. Be clear about what is the population that you wish to study and what are the questions that you wish to ask, and this will then guide you in all your later activity. Otherwise, you may get distracted by different details that you meet along the way. You may ask questions that you don't need the answers to, and you may end up with a lot of data that you don't know what to do with because you never clarified what the purpose of your journey was. So write out clearly and concisely at the beginning of your study what your purpose is, and then pursue that purpose. And if you meet other interesting observations along the way, just leave them aside and continue to pursue your main purpose. When you've identified your purpose, it's possible that someone else has already collected data that addresses most of your needs, and this may be published in a book or journal or available online. This is called secondary data. It's data that was collected by someone else, but which may be useful for your purposes. So begin by doing a literature review and finding out what information is already available that may be useful for answering your questions. Then you can proceed to primary data collection, where you collect data for the specific purposes of your study, focusing on the particular population that's of interest to you. Before deciding to do this survey yourself, you might decide to hire a company that performs such surveys, and then your questions could be included in an omnibus survey which serves a large number of clients. This could not only provide a professional service, but reduce the cost, because the cost of the larger survey is borne by all of the clients involved. The questions that you ask in your survey need to address the questions that need to be answered. This is called validity. That the thing you measure is the thing that you want to measure. So if you're asking questions about how satisfied guests are with a hotel, well then the questions should provide insight on how satisfied they were. It should not leave out important things like the quality of the food or the ease of check-in. So validity means that the questions accurately measure what they set out to measure. The second characteristic of a good questionnaire is that it's reliable. That is, it is consistent over time. If the same questions were asked of the same people a short time later, they would give the same answers. This is called reliability. So a good survey has got both validity and reliability. If you're interested in observing facts, then don't use questions that invite opinions. If you want to know, for example, how long it takes to walk from a certain bedroom in a hotel to the reception, take a stopwatch and find out what that time is. Don't ask someone what they think it is. When you're asking questions, beware of asking leading questions that push the respondent towards a particular answer. Like asking a question like, don't you agree that there are a good variety of snacks available in the bar? People will tend to respond in a way that will make them feel good or make them look good in the eyes of the interviewer. So avoid leading the respondents in how they should answer. Also beware of ambiguous questions, questions that are long or complicated, that use unusual words or that contain negatives or double negatives. The questions should be simple and easy to be understood. Remember, lots of different people will deal with your questionnaire, so it needs to be understandable to everybody. You can try out your survey questions with some colleagues or by carrying out a pilot survey where you use the questions on a few respondents to begin with, and then you can go back and refine your survey questions, taking account of anything that you have learned during the pilot survey. There may be some questions in a survey that will be irrelevant to certain respondents. Like if they didn't have breakfast at the hotel, there's no point in asking them all the questions that you want to ask about the breakfast. So you can include a skip pattern, where if the answer to a certain question is no, then you can direct the respondent to go now directly to question number 16 later in the survey. If you want to find out people's opinions, it's best not to ask for their opinion directly, but rather to present them with a statement and ask them to what extent they agree with the statement. So if you say, the foyer is pleasantly decorated, do you agree, or how well do you agree that the foyer is pleasantly decorated? That's better than asking them, do you think the foyer is pleasantly decorated? Asking people for an opinion is not as simple for them as presenting them with a statement and then allowing them to state if they strongly disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree, or agree strongly. Sometimes you will have multiple questions that address opinion on a 5-point scale like this, and these are often called Likert scales. Then you can add up the scores on all these questions. For example, if you have 20 such questions, each with a 5-point scale, if a respondent gives the most positive answer to every question, then the score will be 100. So it's a way of aggregating questions together to get a measure of opinion. If you're asking respondents about what they have done, ask them about the recent past. Don't ask a question like, how often, usually, do you go to the gym? Because they're not sure what usually means, and it's not clear how far back in their experience they should consider when giving an answer to the question. Instead, ask a direct question about the recent past, such as, how many times have you been to the gym this week? Or in the last 24 hours? Also, to make your questions appear reasonable to the respondent, use funneling. That is, introduce a broad topic and then more detailed questions on that topic, rather than jumping from one topic to another. And if you have sensitive questions to ask, leave them until later in the questionnaire so that some rapport has been established, or until the respondent feels that they are connected with the survey, that you don't begin with a sensitive question or one that's difficult or embarrassing. And there are ways to present these questions in a way that does not expose the respondent to embarrassment. If you can collect numbers, that is the richest form of data. So if the numbers are on a ratio scale, for example, asking respondents how long they spent travelling to the hotel, it's best to ask them for an actual number, how many minutes they spent. Someone might say 28 minutes, someone else might say 14 minutes. That person who spent 28 minutes, they spent twice as long. There's a ratio there. So numbers like that are on a ratio scale. Numbers like time and money and weight, we call this a ratio scale because the ratio of the numbers is meaningful. That's much better than asking people to tick a category saying they spent between 10 minutes and 30 minutes or between 30 minutes and 60 minutes, because actual numbers provide richer data if it's available. You might want to ask about, let's say, outdoor temperatures. For one respondent it might be 28, for another it might be 14. Now these numbers are not on a ratio scale. This is called an interval scale. We cannot say that 28 degrees is twice as hot as 14 degrees because the zero on the temperature scale is not a real zero because there are temperatures lower than that. But we can say that the difference between 14 and 21 degrees is the same as the difference between 21 and 28 degrees. So we say that this is an interval scale. The differences are meaningful. Another way we can use numbers is on an ordinal scale, where we ask people to choose their favourite snack out of a number of options. And so they may number these 1, 2, 3. Now, these numbers are not a ratio scale and not an interval scale. They're simply an ordinal scale. They represent an order of preference. Snack number 1 might be their preference by far, whereas they may have a very small preference for number 2 over number 3. So when we express numbers on an ordinal scale, all we're claiming is that the numbers are in the correct order. Finally, numbers can be on a nominal scale. Like nominal simply means it's a name. These are not really numbers at all. They're just numbers that are being used to represent categories, like ice cream flavours, chocolate, strawberry, vanilla might be represented by numbers 1, 2, 3, but these are not really numbers. But numbers are simply used to designate what these responses are. When we have a yes-no question, it's a binary scale. 1 for yes, 0 for no. And we call that an indicator variable. And in a questionnaire, when we ask a respondent to tick all that apply, we are actually asking a lot of individual questions. And every item that they tick, they're answering yes to that question. And every item that they leave blank, they are answering no to that question. It's good to ask open-ended questions in a survey because there may be issues that are important to the respondents, but the survey designer is unaware of these issues. And so by asking open-ended questions, it allows the possibility to learn from the respondents things that they know that are important for the researcher to find out. Qualitative data analysis can be used to investigate the kind of information that arises from these verbal or written answers. One way to do that simply is with a tag cloud. This is a diagram which shows the words that occur most frequently in the piece of text with a larger font used for the words that occur most frequently. A tag cloud of the website of a university would show words like courses and research and student in large font, showing that these are words that occur very often on the website. Quantitative data analysis explores the numbers rather than the words that arise in the answers. When you're recording your data from a questionnaire, the best way to record the data is in a spreadsheet where there's a column for every question and a row for every respondent. That way, no matter how many questions or sub-questions there are, no matter how many respondents, all of the responses go on a single worksheet. And it's quite easy then to make summaries of the data or to do exploratory analysis where you see to what extent one question is related to another. Sometimes we ask multiple questions that are aimed at the same underlying concept or construct, such as satisfaction. We might ask the customers in a hotel, did you enjoy your stay? Were your expectations met? Would you recommend the hotel to a friend? All of these questions are aiming at addressing the same underlying construct, which is level of satisfaction. And so it's important that these questions would agree with each other because they are aimed at identifying the same construct. One way to explore whether there is this internal consistency is by calculating Cronbach's alpha. Cronbach's alpha is a measure which is equal to 1 when the responses agree perfectly across the different questions and 0 otherwise. Cronbach's alpha should be at least 7, 0.7 rather, for exploratory research, or 0.8 for basic research, or maybe 0.9 for making a decision. We don't expect to get a Cronbach's alpha of exactly 1 because then the questions would be somewhat superfluous because one question gives an answer which is the same as the answer given by another question. So for example, suppose that people were satisfied with the stay in a hotel and the comfort and the facilities, but they were not satisfied with the speakers who spoke at the conference in the hotel. Well then, including a question about the speakers would reduce the consistency because the answers there would not agree, because that would be measuring a different underlying construct. You can read more about this in section 1D of the textbook called Surveys.